Welcome, travelers of the night. Tonight, we delve into the chilling legend of the Wendigo, a creature born from the darkest hunger and coldest winters, said to roam the northern forests. The Wendigo is a gaunt, monstrous spirit with hollow eyes and insatiable hunger, forever cursed to stalk the shadows between the trees, waiting for the unwary. Before we begin, if you enjoy these tales from the deep woods and want more stories to haunt your nights, please subscribe and ring the bell so others can discover these whispers from the wild. Don't forget to like the video and in the comments, tell me where you're from and whether you believe the Wendigo still wanders near you. Now, settle in, the forest is listening. The Forest That Forgot His Name, Chapter 1. The Map in the Atectimus. Wren was a man of ordinary habits. Morning coffee brewed strong and black, late night reading under a faded green lamp, and the occasional weekend hike into the quieter corners of his province. He worked as a surveyor, not out of love for the job, but because it allowed him solitude. Nature, even in its indifference, felt more genuine than people. It wasn't a desire for danger or discovery that led him into the attic of his late grandfather's house. Just boredom. He had been snowed in for 3 days straight, trapped in the old countryside home that had passed down through generations. The silence pressed on him. The snow outside was heavy and wet, muffling every sound, creating a cocoon of stillness that somehow felt more like a tomb than a haven. The attic was a forgotten place filled with moth-eaten jackets, broken furniture, stacks of yellowed newspapers, and a dusty trunk that hadn't been opened in decades. Thomas had never been particularly sentimental, but something about the air up there felt different, heavier. Charged inside the trunk, he found a collection of war medals, black and white photos of grim-faced relatives, and a folded map that felt oddly warm to the touch. It was hand-drawn with shaky ink lines and cryptic markings. The paper was old, brittle, but the red ink that circled one location looked fresh, as if drawn yesterday. It marked a stretch of forest near the northern border of the province-wide expanse with no name. Curiously, it didn't exist on any modern map. Chapter 2. Into the Pines. Thomas couldn't let it go. He spent the next day scouring old archives online and flipping through local geography records. Nothing. That forest simply didn't exist in any known documentation, which, for a surveyor, was deeply troubling or thrilling. He wasn't sure which. He packed light, but intentionally. Compass, emergency radio, food rations for a week, thermal layers, and a camera. He drove as far north as roads would take him, reaching a rural outpost that had been abandoned in the early 90s. From there, he followed the topography from the map. As soon as he passed beyond the known trails and into the tree line, the silence changed. It wasn't simply quiet, it was void. The air tasted old, untouched. No wind, no birdsong, not even the creak of shifting tree trunks. The deeper he walked, the more the silence pressed in. His footsteps sounded too loud. The trees were ancient, their bark rough like alligator hide and darkened as if scorched. Branches curled downward like fingers, some of them brittle enough to snap under a breath. After a few miles, he noticed his compass was spinning. His GPS flickered, then died completely. His watch lost time. Snow began to fall thick, heavy, unnatural. It was only September, chapter 3. The imitation voice. He set up camp near a frozen creek. It was shallow, the water beneath moving so sluggishly it appeared still. A half circle of spruce trees offered some protection from the elements. He built a fire, noted the dwindling daylight, and tried to journal his impressions. That night, the silence broke. Thomas... He sat up in his sleeping bag, blood cold. The voice was soft, familiar. It came again, double quotes, Thomas... Come back... It was his own voice. His heart pounded. He called out, foolishly, instinctively. The echo swallowed his words. There was no more sound that night, but he didn't sleep. In the morning, there were footprints in the snow identical to his own, though he hadn't left the tent. They circled the campsite once, then vanished toward the trees. He followed them briefly, but they stopped abruptly, as if whoever made them had vanished mid-step. Chapter 4. The tree with isthmus tried to retrace his route. Every direction looked the same trees, the same patterns of snow. He began marking trunks with a blade. When he returned to a marked tree, it was deeper into the forest than when he started. He found one tree taller than the rest, with bark that had been stripped away in jagged patches. Something glinted from the gouges. He looked closer. Fingernails. Human. Fingernails embedded in the wood, scratched in desperation. Carved symbols spiraled around them, not runes, not letters, just loops and jagged lines that made his head hurt to decipher. That night, the voice returned, but not alone. There were whispers, dozens, layered, overlapping, rising and falling like wind through broken flutes. You're already one of us. He dreamt of a massive tree with a dozen staring eyes, each blink timed with the beat of his heart. When he awoke, his fingers were numb and blue, despite the fire. Chapter 5. Hunger of the woods. Rations were growing scarce. He caught glimpses of movement, not animals, figures, thin, impossibly tall, their limbs too long and heads cocked at inhuman angles. Sometimes he saw just the prints they left, clawed, bipedal, pressing inches deep into the snow. He marked his trail with strips of bright orange cloth. Hours later, he found them tied in knots around trees behind him. He tried speaking to the forest, apologizing, pleading. The silence only deepened. Then the forest whispered, "You're not lost. You're found." Chapter 6. The face in the mirror. On the 6th day, he stumbled upon a pond frozen, still to still. The air around it was warmer, but it did not comfort him. He leaned over and looked into it. He didn't see his reflection. He saw himself, but changed. Black, soulless eyes, frostbitten lips, antlers curling up from a bruised scalp. His skin was pale and tight, as if drawn over bone. The reflection grinned. "You were always here." He turned and ran, tearing through trees, scratching his arms and face, but when he stopped, breath ragged. The pond was there again. Chapter 7. The Feast of Memory. That night, Thomas dreamt. A long wooden table stretched across the forest. Snow fell on raw, glistening meat laid out on wooden platters. Seated around the table were versions of himself, one bloated and grey, one skeletal, one with antlers, one missing its eyes. They laughed with his voice, chewed with bloody teeth. The head of the table sat the Wendigo. It wore his face, older and cracked, its teeth too many and too sharp. It raised a toast to him with a goblet of red. You forgot your name long ago. That was the final key. Chapter 8. The forest speakstumps stopped fighting. He wandered, the forest whispered always now. It told him things, secrets about the cold, about hunger, about time. The whispers fed him when his body wouldn't. He found the map again in his coat. The paper was clean, untouched by time, but the name had changed. The forest had a name now. Thomas. Chapter 9. When the searchers came weeks later, a search team found his last known location. The tent was buried in snow, the firewood untouched, long rotted. There was no body. Inside. They found a journal. It was his, but the writing was alien, curling symbols and broken script. At the last page was one phrase, legible and clean. I am the forest now. One of the searchers, a man named Daniel, lingered behind. He swore he heard a voice from the trees. Daniel, come back, Chapter 10. The whisper that follows back in town, Daniel began to change. He dreamed of frost and footsteps. He found pine needles in his bed, melted snow on his floor. His compass wouldn't work. His reflection lingered after he moved. One night, as he turned out the lights, he heard it again. Daniel, come back. The forest that forgot its name had remembered him, and it was hungry again. The Cabin That Waits All Winter, Chapter 1. An invitation in the snow. Marla Jenks had never believed in omens. Practical to a fault, she worked as a freelance cartographer for northern environmental firms, often spending months at a time charting logging trails or the edges of protected forests. The work was lonely but peaceful. She liked the world when it was quiet. One day in late October, just before the first snow, she received a handwritten letter in a yellowed envelope. No return address. The stamp had long since faded. Inside was a single page written in delicate script. There is a cabin that waits for you, Marla. Come before the first blizzard. You have questions that only the cold can answer. Below the words was a hand-drawn map. Sparse details, no highways, just a winding trail through the northern backwoods and a red X at the very end. The location was remote, far beyond service, civilization, or reason. She should have ignored it, but the name at the bottom stopped her heart. Love, Jonah. Jonah had been dead for over 5 years. Chapter 2. Into the backwoods. Marla stared at the letter long after the room had darkened. Outside, the first snowflakes drifted silently against the window pane, cold and slow, as if hesitant to touch the earth. Her fingers trembled, tracing the delicate loops of Jonah's handwriting again. Why now? Why after all these years? Packing was mechanical boots, thick socks, thermal layers folded neatly beside her worn field notebook and compass. The map, though crude, was strangely compelling, its red X a beacon that pulled at her curiosity like a magnet. She left her apartment before dawn, the streets slick with ice and lit by the weak glow of street lamps. The city felt distant as she drove north, tires crunching on frost-hardened gravel that gave way to narrow logging roads swallowed by dense pines. As she ventured deeper, cell service flickered and died. The world shrank to the confines of her headlights and the dark silhouettes pressing close on either side. The map's winding trail began just past an old ranger station, abandoned years ago, its windows boarded and forgotten. Marla's boots crunched the snow-covered path, each step swallowed by the hushed forest. The air here tasted different, sharp, ancient, and untouched by human breath. The trees towered, their bare branches weaving a frozen cathedral roof above her head. No birds sang, no animals stirred, only silence, thick and watchful. Every so often the path forked, the map offering no help. She paused, scanning the faint impressions in the snow, her only guides now. The forest seemed to lean in closer, the shadows curling and twisting at the edges of her vision. A sudden cold breeze brushed her cheek, carrying with it a whisper so faint she wasn't sure if it was real or the wind playing tricks. Marla, she froze. Her heartbeat thundered. She shook her head, blaming the wind and the isolation. Yet the name lingered, curling in the air like smoke. Hours passed as she pushed onward, the sky a pale grey smear overhead. The sun dipped lower, and with it the temperature plummeted. Her breath steamed in rhythmic clouds, footsteps muffled beneath fresh snowfall. Finally, the trees thinned, revealing a clearing she hadn't expected. There, half buried beneath a mantle of snow, stood the cabin, smaller than she imagined, its weathered wood dark and slick with ice. The windows were blank, eyes watching her approach. The door hung slightly ajar. Marla's fingers tightened around the map. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but the pull of the unknown was stronger. She stepped inside. The air inside was brittle, cold, untouched by fire or life. Dust motes floated in shafts of fading light. The floorboards groaned beneath her boots. The silence pressing against her ears. On a rickety table lay a rusted pocket watch, frozen at midnight. Nearby, a carved wooden totem sat cracked and worn, its eyes hollow, her skin prickled. Somewhere, deep in the forest, the wind sighed soft and mournful as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. And somewhere, a voice whispered again, Marla. Chapter 3. The cabin's shadow, the sun, sank behind the trees, casting long fingers of darkness through the cabin's cracked windows. Marla's breath came in quick, visible puffs as the cold crept inside, wrapping around her like a shroud. She pulled her jacket tighter and lit a small lantern she'd packed, its warm glow revealing the cabin's sparse interior. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, faded and stained by years of neglect. In one corner, a rusted wood stove sat cold and empty. Scattered across a wooden bench were remnants of a lifelong gone old wool scarf, a cracked mug with dried stains, and a few brittle photographs. Marla's eyes caught the edge of a journal peeking from beneath, a loose floorboard. Kneeling, she pried it free, the leather cover stiff with age, but intact. The first pages were neat, careful entries, notes about mapping trails, observations about the forest, detailed sketches of trees and terrain. But as she flipped further, the handwriting grew erratic. Words blurred and crossed out. Then came the chilling passages, descriptions of a presence stalking the woods, a hunger that gnawed at the mind, whispers carried on the cold wind. One entry, dated just weeks before Jonah's disappearance, chilled her to the bone. The hunger is real. It waits in the shadows where the light cannot reach. It watches. I hear the trees breathing my name. It is patient, I am not sure how much longer I can resist." Marla's fingers trembled. She closed the journal and pressed it to her chest. The silence in the cabin felt alive, as if it were waiting for her next move. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's fragile frame through the window. The bare branches swayed like skeletal fingers, casting twisted shadows on the snow. Suddenly, a soft thud echoed from the attic above. Her heart leaped slowly. She rose, every nerve on edge, and reached for the creaky staircase. Each step groaned beneath her weight as she climbed into the dimness overhead. The attic was a cramped space filled with forgotten relics, dusty crates, moth-eaten blankets, broken furniture. And then, caught in the lantern's light, something moved. Not quite a shadow, but a shape. Tall, thin, twisted. Marla blinked. Nothing, just the wind. But the cabin felt colder now, the air heavier. A whisper brushed past her ear. "Marla." She spun around, lantern shaking in her hand. Only darkness stared back. Chapter 4. Echoes of the past. Marla's heart pounded so fiercely she thought it might burst through her ribs. She descended the attic stairs with trembling legs, the whisper lingering like a cold breath against her skin. She forced herself to steady her breathing, blaming exhaustion and the creeping cold that had settled deep in the cabin's bones. She pulled the journal closer, the cryptic entries gnawing at her mind. Who had Jonah been fighting in those last days? What had consumed him? Determined to understand, Marla spent the rest of the afternoon combing the cabin for clues. In a battered trunk beneath the window, she found old letters between Jonah and someone named Evelyn. Their tone was warm, hopeful, but as the pages progressed, the words darkened, hinting at fear and desperation. One letter caught her eye. Written on thin, yellowed paper, it read, "The forest is changing, Evelyn. It's hungry in ways I never imagined. I can feel it watching, waiting to pull me under the snow. If I don't return, know that I fought with everything I had. Don't come looking." A shiver ran down Marla's spine. The forest wasn't just a backdrop, was alive, and it was hungry. As twilight fell, the wind howled again, louder this time, rattling the cabin and shaking the fragile glass. Marla felt a presence outside, something waiting just beyond the frosted windows. She wasn't alone. Her eyes darted to the door. It creaked open slowly, as if pushed by an unseen hand. The shadows spilled inside, thick and cold. And then, from the darkness, came a low, guttural sound, a breath, a growl, a whisper. Marla's fingers clenched the journal. She was caught in the forest's hunger, the cabin's cold grip tightening around her. Chapter 5. The Wendigo's hunger night fell like a shudder, plunging the cabin into near-total darkness, save for the thin glow of Marla's lantern. She tried to keep her breathing steady, but every creak and whistle of the wind outside made her pulse race. Then, from somewhere beyond the cabin walls, a low, agonized wail echoed through the frozen forest, long, mournful, and unhuman. It wrapped around her like ice. Marla's eyes widened. She had read the stories, the old legends whispered by those who knew the woods. The Wendigo, the ancient spirit of hunger and madness, cursed to wander the winter wilderness, forever starving. Creature with limbs, two long eyes like burning coals, skin pale as death, and a hunger that could never be satisfied. She told herself it was just a story, just a myth. But the air thickened, grew colder. Her lantern flickered violently, shadows dancing on the cabin walls. The scratching began a faint tapping at the window, like claws lightly raking the glass. Marla stood frozen, her gaze drawn to the frost-covered pane. There, outlined in the pale moonlight, a figure stood just beyond the glass. Tally, possibly tall, limbs unnaturally elongated. Its eyes, glowing faint amber, locked onto hers. The creature's mouth was a twisted maw of broken teeth, saliva frozen at its lips. Marla stumbled back, heart pounding wildly, every survival instinct screaming to run. But the cabin door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. She was trapped. The Wendigo's voice slithered into her mind, not words, but hunger itself, ancient and terrible. You belong to the cold now. The cabin seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, shadows lengthening like claws reaching to claim her. Outside, the snow fell thicker, muffling the world, burying the past beneath endless white. And Marla understood the hunger was no longer a story. It was here, waiting for her. Chapter 6. The breaking point. Marla's breath came in ragged gasps as the Wendigo's presence pressed closer, the air around her growing impossibly cold. Her lantern flickered, then died, plunging the cabin into darkness thick as ink. She fumbled for her lighter, fingers numb and clumsy, the flame sputtering to life. Outside, the creature's silhouette loomed in the moonlight, monstrous and impossibly still. The silence between its agonized wails felt like a tightening noose. Marla backed against the wall, clutching the journal like a talisman. The last entries Jonah wrote flickered through her mind, warnings, confessions, please. Suddenly, a sharp knock on the door or window, but the wooden floor beneath her feet. The cabin seemed alive, breathing, waiting, desperate. Marla flung opened the journal to its final page. There, scrawled in frantic handwriting, was a crude drawing, a symbol intertwined with thorny branches and an eye at its center. A charm, a ward. She traced the symbol with trembling fingers, then pressed the page to the cabin door. A sudden gust slammed the door shut, rattling the walls. The Wendigo's howl shattered the night, furious and wild. But then, pause. The temperature rose, the cabin's shadows recoiling. The creature's amber eyes flared one last time, filled with rage and pain, before it vanished into the night's whiteness. Chapter 7. The cold truth dawns. Pale light crept through frost-rimed windows. Marla sat huddled on the floor, the journal open but forgotten beside her. Exhausted yet alive, she watched as the snow settled silently outside. Blanketing the forest once more, she knew the Wendigo would return. The hunger was eternal, a curse that could never be fully beaten. But for now, the forest was silent, and so was the cabin. Marla wrapped her coat tight and stepped outside, the fresh snow crunching beneath her boots. The red X on the map still marked a place of ancient hunger and sorrow. But Marla also carried a warning, a story to tell. The forest waits. The hunger waits. And sometimes the cold remembers your name. The logging camp in the pines. Chapter 1. The last letters. The cold bit deep in the winter of 1879. When the logging camp nestled in the pines first felt the creeping shadow of hunger. The trees towered like ancient sentinels, their thick branches, heavy with snow, muting every sound but the steady chopping of axes and the occasional creak of sledges hauling timber. James Calloway was the foreman, a sturdy man with hands scarred from years of labor and eyes that rarely betrayed fear. Each night, by the dim glow of a lantern, he wrote letters to his wife, Abigail, back home. His pen trembled with exhaustion, and something darker, something he tried to hide beneath words of routine and hope. Dear Abigail, one letter began. The forest has grown quieter these days. The men grow thin. Food runs low, but the work must go on. But it was the dreams James described in those letters that chilled him most. A figure, taller than any man, moving silently between the trees. Its skin was pale, stretched tight over bones that seemed to jut out like broken branches. It never spoke, but its eyes glowed with an endless hunger. I see it in my dreams. Another letter read, walking just beyond the firelight, waiting. I hear its breath in the wind, soft and hollow. The men say it's the famine or madness. I don't know anymore. One by one, the loggers vanished. Some were found days later, their bodies frozen and twisted, faces frozen in terror. Others disappeared without a trace. The forests swallowed them whole. The letters stopped in January, buried beneath a fresh blanket of snow and silence. Chapter 2. The disappearing trailing the early spring of 1929. A man named Elliot Greaves stumbled across a yellowed envelope buried in the back of an old records chest in the Provincial Archives of Ontario. He hadn't meant to find it. He'd been researching 19th century timber roots for a heritage survey when the chest caught his attention. Untouched, unlabeled, and sealed with an iron clasp that squealed when it opened. Inside were pages upon pages of letters, elegant cursive on brittle paper, each one signed James Calloway, foreman. Kimpwaitigablas. Elliot read the first letter on a whim, then the second, then the 12th. By the time the office lights dimmed with the janitor's approach, Elliot had forgotten to eat. The words gripped him, the exhaustion, the cold, the starvation, ... and something else. Something watching. The final letter chilled him most. It ended mid-sentence. Asterisk Abigail. Tonight I saw it up close. It stood among the pines, tall and crooked, mouth hanging open as though it had forgotten how to breathe. I think the ink trailed off violently, the paper torn at the corner. Curiosity became obsession. The next morning, Elliot requested access to old forestry maps and discovered the location of Camp W13 deep in the wilderness, long since abandoned, and now part of an unregulated expanse known unofficially as the Hollow Pines. They said no one went in there anymore. Trees had overtaken the trails, snow came earlier than elsewhere, stayed longer. But Elliot packed a tent, food, a notebook, and the letters. He intended to find the camp, and maybe, if the cabin still stood, to finish reading James Calloway's last sentence. Chapter 3. The pines remember 3 days into the Hollow Pines, Elliot stopped seeing animal tracks. The forest had grown so quiet, it felt like the snow itself was listening. Pines closed in tighter with every step, their branches tangled, like fingers over a mouth. He followed a faded map he'd stitched together from the old survey documents, veering off old snowmobile trails, cutting through dry creek beds and across silent ravines. Even his GPS refused to cooperate, freezing each time he tried to log a waypoint. Technology was no use here. On the 5th day, he saw the first sign, half buried in snow, a rusted axe wedged into a tree stump. The handle had rotted away, leaving only splinters. The next day, he found the logging road, or what remained of it. Tree roots had burst through the packed earth, splitting it like veins under brittle skin. It led into a dense patch of forest, where even daylight looked grey. And then, without warning, the camp appeared. Collapsed sheds, rotted sledges, a pile of broken timber with rusted saw blades buried within. And in the middle, nearly overtaken by snow and underbrush, cabin. Narrow, half sunk into the ground, its roof hunched like a man in prayer. Elliot stepped toward it, heart in his throat. He didn't notice the claw marks on the door until he reached for the handle. Chapter 4. Beneath the cabin the door groaned on. Ancient hinges resisting like it hadn't been opened in decades. The air that greeted Elliot was musty and still, thick with rot and something else, a coppery undertone, like blood dried long ago. Inside, the cabin was a single room. A collapsed bunk lay against one wall. An iron stove rusted in the corner. Dust and leaves covered the warped floorboards, but it was the trapdoor in the center bolted with 3 iron latches that drew Elliot's attention. He set his bag down, lit a lantern, and knelt beside it. The floor was scratched, not just worn, but gouged, as if something had clawed its way out once, not in. He hesitated, then unlatched each bolt with a soft clunk. The trapdoor creaked open, revealing a narrow, dark shaft descending by ladder into cold stone and shadow. The air from below was wrong still, yes, but heavier. Like it had weight, intention. Elliot descended slowly, one rung at a time. The ladder groaned under his weight. The lantern flickered at the bottom. The space opened into a dirt floor cellar. Shelves lined the walls, still holding glass jars, long since spoiled, an old cot, a broken lantern, a skeletal arm half buried in the far corner, fingerbones curled like they had tried to grasp the air dot, and on the far wall, scratched deep into the stone, were the final words of James Calloway. We fed it to stay warm. We fed it to stay alive, and now it waits beneath the snow. It never left. Elliot turned. Behind him, something moved in the dark, slow, dragging footsteps, and then a knock. From above. Chapter 5. The last campfire. Elliot scrambled up the ladder, nearly dropping the lantern in his rush. He burst through the trapdoor, slamming it shut and bolting it again, his breath clouding in the cold, stale air. The knock had stopped, but the silence now throbbed with pressure, like the forest outside had shifted slightly to watch. He stayed in the cabin until dusk, heart thudding with each creak of wood. When the sun bled out behind the trees, painting the snow in hues of red and rust, Elliot packed his things. He could not spend the night here. He lit a torch and moved to the fire pit outside and shone stones, still arranged in a rough circle. He built a fire, fed it branches and pages from his notebook, watching shadows dance against the cabin's frostbitten walls. Then, in the orange flicker, he saw them. Footprints, dozens of them, bare, leading from the trees. Around the fire pit, to the cabin, then ... vanishing. Elliot spun. The shadows behind the trees moved. A shape tall, spindly, joints bending wrong, face stretched too thin. Its mouth hung open like a scream remembered. It did not run. It drifted. Elliot backed toward the fire, tossing logs into the flames. The creature circled just beyond the light, pacing, watching its ribs pushed against its skin like branches. Its eyes sunken, gleaming, never blinked, and then it spoke. Not aloud, but inside Elliot's mind. You read its name, you woke it. You carry hunger now. The fire sputtered. Wind howled through the trees. The creature faded into the dark. Morning came, pale and cold. Elliot was gone. Only the fire pit remained, embers still warm, and beside them a final page written in Elliot's hand. It waits for readers, for warmth, for voices to echo again beneath the snow. If you find these words, them The Feast of Snow Chapter 1, The Last Exit. The blizzard came faster than forecasted. It was supposed to dust the highway with flurries, then taper off by dusk. But by 4 p.m., the snow had become a wall thick, howling and endless. Visibility dropped 2 feet, cell towers failed, cars slid, stalled, and were abandoned on shoulders like skeletal remains by luck or fate. A group of 7 travelers found refuge at a lonely roadside diner, Maggie's Junction, the only light 4 miles on, Route 67. Inside. The diner looked like a time capsule from the 1950s, checkerboard floors, red vinyl booths, a jukebox that no longer played, and a chalkboard menu scrawled with half-yearist pie specials. The cook, Maggie herself, locked the door behind them, muttering something about the weather and fate. Among the stranded, a trucker named Lou, 2 college students on winter break, a quiet mother and her teenage daughter, a drifter with a bandaged hand, and an old man with clouded eyes who said very little but watched everyone as if he knew their names before they spoke. When the wind knocked the power out at 6:12 p.m., Maggie lit candles, served lukewarm stew, and suggested they pass the time with stories. After all, she said, that's what people used to do before electricity. And so they did. Each told a tale, ghosts, creatures, regrets. Some were funny, others disturbing. The group laughed nervously, the way strangers do when trying not to admit they're scared, until the old man began to speak. He didn't introduce himself, just stared into the flickering candlelight and started, his voice soft and dry as snow-drifted pine. Let me tell you about the Wendigo, he said. Not the kind in movies. The real one, the one that waits in the dark, wearing a skin not its own. Chapter 2. The Old Man's Tale. There was a village once. The old man said, far north, where winters came in October and didn't leave until May. They say the people there knew better than to wander too far into the woods during snowstorms. Because in those woods, something walked. The others leaned in. Even the cook stopped wiping the counter. A man, let's call him Elias, was stranded like us during a blizzard. He was part of a hunting party, but they were separated. Snow piled so fast it swallowed the trails. He found a shack, half collapsed, and took shelter. And there, in the dark, he wasn't alone. The mother held her daughter's hand. The trucker muttered something under his breath. It didn't speak, just watched. It looked like a man-thin, hungry, pale as frostbite, but it wasn't. Elias knew because it never blinked, never breathed. It sat across from him and smiled. And when the storm ended, only one of them left that shack. The diner was quiet. Snow scratched against the windows. "But that's not the real trick," the old man whispered. "The real trick is this. The Wendigo learned to sit with people, laugh, pretend, and it never eats quickly. It waits until you tell your story, until you trust, until you notice someone's gone missing." He paused, then the lights flickered just once. Everyone turned to the window, but saw only white. When they looked back, one chair sat empty, and a trail of melting snow led up to it. Chapter 3. The Stranger's Smile. Maggie was the first to speak, her voice tight with forced calm. Maybe they went to the restroom, but no one moved. The chair that now sat empty had been occupied by the drifter, the man with the bandaged hand. Someone mumbled his name, Keith or maybe Kent, but nobody could remember clearly. It was like fog had rolled through their memory, wiping clean the specifics. "He was right there," whispered one of the college students, eyes darting. Right there. They checked the bathroom. Empty. The back pantry. Nothing. Maggie checked the supply closet herself and returned looking pale. All the windows are shut. No footprints. But there were footprints, only not leading out, just in. A trail of melted snow ended at the chair. The old man sat silently, hands folded. That was when the paranoia started. The mother pulled her daughter close. The trucker reached instinctively for a weapon he didn't have. The remaining student backed against the wall, staring at everyone. Someone whispered, "It's a joke, right?" But no one laughed. Then, from the kitchen, came a sound. A low, wet shuffle. Everyone turned. The candlelight flickered. Maggie raised a hand, motioning for silence. From behind the swinging kitchen door came a breath-a-long, rattling inhale. Then silence. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy. The door creaked open, but there was nothing. Just the smell of cold pine and the sound of something wet dripping onto tile. Then, softly, the jukebox, dead for decades, crackled to life. A single note played, then another. The tune was unrecognizable, off-key, wrong. The old man finally looked up. "You asked for stories," he said, smiling. "But you didn't say you believed them." Chapter 4. Meltwater. The jukebox sputtered and fell silent. No one moved. The candles burned lower, casting flickering shadows like figures dancing on the walls. Maggie, trembling slightly, turned to the old man. "What did you mean when you said it learns to pretend?" He didn't answer. Instead, the college student, a tall girl named Harper, stood up. "This isn't funny anymore. Whoever's playing tricks, stop." Lou, the trucker, exhaled sharply. "I didn't come in here for ghost stories." Maggie cleared her throat. "Everyone just sit down. No one's going anywhere until morning. We're snowed in. Let's stay calm." But the silence had teeth now. The kind that bit into thought and turned it bloody. Harper glanced around the group. "We were 7, right?" Everyone nodded. 7. So count again. They did. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A long pause. They counted again. Still 6. Harper pointed at the mother. "You and your daughter. That's 2. Me, Lou, Maggie, the old man. That's 6. Who was the 7th? "The drifter," Maggie said, but her voice cracked. "What was his name again?" Lou asked. No one could answer. Where did he sit? They all pointed to different chairs. What did he say when we first walked in? No one knew. The old man finally broke the silence. You see, it's not the hunger that comes first, it's the forgetting. The Wendigo eats from the inside out. Names, faces, voices, all gone before the body. Harper sat slowly. You mean ... It's still here. The old man nodded. Just then, a new sound emerged. Faint, subtle, like the whimper of wind, but it came from under the floorboards. A scraping, then chewing. Lou stood. I'll check the cellar. Maggie grabbed his arm. No one goes alone. So 3 of them went: Lou, Maggie, and Harper. The rest stayed above. Candles clutched like talismans. The cellar door creaked open. The stairs descended into black dot below. It was cold, colder than it should have been. Frost laced the walls like veins. The air smelled of pine and iron. They found nothing but cans, crates, and silence, until they turned to leave. On the inside of the cellar, door scratched, deep with something clawed were for words. Someone. Here is hungry. They slammed the door shut. When they returned upstairs, the old man was gone, and one more candle had gone out. Chapter 5. The empty booth. The booth the old man had occupied sat empty. Not just vacant. The candle gone, the chair tucked in. No trace of his presence remained, not even the mark of melted snow where he'd sat. Maggie stared in silence. I saw him. He was just here. No, Harper whispered. He was never here. That's when they heard it again, the chewing. But this time it came from the ceiling. Everyone looked up. The roof groaned under an invisible weight. Frost began to creep in from the seams, webbing across the plaster-like veins of ice. The teenage girl cried softly. Her mother held her close, trying to hush her, but the sound only seemed to draw attention from the far end of the diner. A draft rolled in icy and foul. It carried a scent no one could place exactly, but it made their stomachs turn. Something like rot or old meat. Then Harper noticed the window. A single handprint, pressed from the inside. She backed away, grabbing a steak knife from the counter. Lou, pale and sweating, shook his head. We're not making it till morning, are we? The lights above flickered again. One by one, the candles began to go out. Harper turned to Maggie. How do you kill it? You don't, Maggie said. You endure or you starve first. The mother cried out, her daughter gone. The chair beside her sat empty. No one had seen the girl leave. They searched the booths, the restroom, even the pantry again, but there were no footprints. Only another damp handprint on the glass door, and then another dot and another dot. It was already inside. Tell a story. Maggie whispered, it likes stories. Maybe it will wait. Harper stood, voice shaking, and began to speak. She told a tale from her childhood about a shadow in her closet that turned out to be her father's jacket. She told it through tears, each word drawn out like a candle barely holding flame. Then Lou spoke, a ghost story from a truck stop in Kansas. Then Maggie, the diner's history about a man who vanished in the winter of '72, whose boots were found at the door, still warm. Each story kept the Wendigo fed with attention, but not with flesh. Not yet, until Lou made a mistake. He paused, hesitated, and the chewing returned from behind him. He turned and saw his own reflection in the window wrong, smiling, hungry, the glass shattered. Lou screamed when the storm finally cleared by dawn. Only two were found inside. Harper, eyes wide, rocking in place, and the teenage girl curled in a booth, whispering her own name over and over so she wouldn't forget it. Of the others there was no sign, just wet footprints, melted candles, and a trail of pine needles that led out into the snow. The Boy Who Followed Deer Tracks, Chapter 1. The footprints beyond the fence in the northern village of Wapakeka. Winters came with a hush so deep it felt like the world forgot how to speak. Children played in bundled coats, their laughter muffled by scarves and snow. Elders sat inside, watching the tree line from frost-framed windows. One of those children was a boy named Eli, quiet, curious, and smaller than the rest. He was 8, the winter it happened. He'd been warned about the woods. Everyone had. The grown-ups said it wasn't the bears you had to fear, but the quiet. The pines had a way of pulling you deeper, of making you forget the path home. But Eli loved the deer. He would press his face to the glass and wait for them shy ghosts of the forest, slipping from tree to tree. Sometimes they came near. Sometimes they watched him back. It was just after dusk when he saw the prints, fresh, sharp, leading from the edge of the forest, right past the fence behind his family's home. He followed the cold bit deep, but Eli's boots held, and his little flashlight cast a brave yellow cone on the snow dot. At first, it was exciting. The tracks were easy to follow, pressed cleanly in the soft powder. But then he noticed something strange. The prints were too big. Not enormous, but wrong. Unevenly spaced. Too deep, dot, and then dot, dot, dot. They changed. Halfway into the pines, the shape of the hoof marks began to blur. Then flattened, dot, then spread out. The deer, whatever it was, had started walking on 2 legs. Eli stopped. The woods were dark now, silent. Even the snow had stopped falling. Something snapped behind him. He turned too fast, dropped his flashlight. The beam spun, catching bark, branches on for a second. Something pale. He ran, but not home. He followed the tracks. He didn't mean to, but something in his head whispered that the deer needed him, that it was sad, that it was alone, that it wanted to play. And then his laughter echoed far into the woods, far too deep. He never came back. Only his flashlight was found, still glowing weakly at the base of a pine tree, surrounded by footprints that ended in claw marks. Years passed. The village buried an empty box. But one day 15, Winter's Litera, hunter returning from the trapline, heard something, a child's voice, laughter, high, clear, and young. He turned on, saw Eli. Same jacket, same boots, same face. He hadn't aged a day, but his eyes were wrong, and his breath didn't fog. Chapter 2. The return to the pine sears had passed since Eli vanished. The village whispered the tale with caution, warning children never to follow strange tracks in the woods. But now Eli was back. No one knew where he had been or how he remained unchanged. He appeared one cold evening at the edge of the village, eyes gleaming with something unnatural and emptiness that chilled even the elders. His parents, frail with age, wept relief at first, but their joy turned to dread. as the boy refused to speak or eat. He wandered the village silently, his laughter sometimes echoing from nowhere, a hollow sound that made the air thick. At night, strange noises echoed from the pines, the same eerie laughter, but distorted, distant. The elders met. Quietly, they told stories passed down. The Wendigo's trick was to imitate innocence, to lure the living into the woods and replace them. The village knew what must be done, but with Eli standing at their doorstep, how could they turn him away? Chapter 3. Whispers among the pines. The village elders gathered in the longhouse as the northern winds howled outside. Their faces were worn and lined, eyes clouded with worry. They spoke in hushed tones about the ancient pacta promised to respect the forest and its spirits, and the terrible price of breaking that trust. Eli's presence was a breach, a sign that the Wendigo was near. One elder, Old Marrow, told the story of a child lost long ago, who returned but was no longer the same. His laughter was a trap, his smile a mask hiding hunger. That night, the village heard it again, the child's laughter drifting from the trees, mingling with the sigh of the wind. Families barred their doors, fires burned low, but Eli was gone. Only his footprints remained too large, too deep, leading once more into the dark heart of the forest. Chapter 4. The Shadow in the Clearing. The search parties organized by the villagers moved cautiously into the pines, each step crunching softly. In the snow, the cold was biting, but a deeper chill ran through them, a sense of something watching. Waiting. In a small clearing, they found strange signs, broken branches, flattened grass, and enormous footprints beside the child-sized ones. The footprints looked like a deer's, but stretched unnaturally, and the claw marks were far too long for any known animal. A faint sound drifted on the wind, a child's laughter, twisted and hollowed. Suddenly, a figure darted between the trees. It was Eli, or something like him. His eyes glowed faintly in the dusk, and his smile was too wide, too sharp. The searchers called out, but he vanished like smoke. As they retreated, the village shaman warned them, "He is no longer a boy. The Wendigo wears his face now." Chapter 5. The unaging boy years passed, and Eli remained an unaging shadow haunting the village borders. Children whispered about the boy who followed deer tracks, warning each other not to wander after dark. One winter's night, a traveler passing through stopped at the village. He saw Eli standing silently by the frozen lake, eyes reflecting the moonlight like twin lanterns. The traveler approached cautiously, but Eli did not speak. Instead, he turned and walked into the forest, disappearing into the shadows between the trees. The traveler reported back to the elders, who nodded grimly. "They say he's the Wendigo's mark," Old Marrow said, "a reminder that the forest never forgets, and neither does hunger." Eli's laughter still echoed, sometimes haunting, endless and forever young. Epilogue. The laughter in the pines long. After the snow melts and the seasons turn, the forest remembers. Sometimes, when the wind is just right and the moon hangs low, travelers hear a boy's laughter drifting through the trees. It's clear and joyful, but empty, hollow. A sound that beckons, that lures. A sound that no one should follow, because the Wendigo wears many faces, and sometimes it wears the face of a child who never grew up. The candle that wouldn't go out. Chapter 1. The hermits, vigilamus, had lived alone in the forest for years, long enough to forget the rhythm of village life, the chatter of neighbors, the warm glow of hearth fires. His cabin was a rough shelter, nestled among ancient pines, where snow muffled footsteps and the wind whispered secrets older than memory. Every evening, as dusk faded, Amos performed a quiet ritual. He lit a single candle by the window, a small flame flickering bravely against the creeping dark. It was not just habit, it was protection. The old stories said the Wendigo hunted in the deepest cold, drawn by silence and hunger. Amos did not believe in ghosts or monsters, not anymore, but superstition was hard to shake in a forest so vast and empty. The candle's flame was his anchor to the world of the living, a fragile beacon of warmth and safety amid the endless night. That first night of the new winter, the air was still and biting cold. Amos wrapped his hands around a cup of bitter tea, watching the flame dance, casting soft shadows against the cabin walls. Outside, the pines stood silent and dark. Time passed slowly. The wind began to stir. Chapter 2. The Whispering Wind. The wind began as a gentle murmur, threading its way through the pines and around Amos's cabin. It was barely more than a sigh at first, a breath against the frozen world, but as the hours passed, it grew whistling low, twisting through the trees like an unseen presence. The candle's flame flickered uncertainly, as if caught between defiance and despair. Amos sat close to the fire, eyes never leaving the stubborn candle by the window. He noticed tiny shadows gathering at the edges of the light, shapes that didn't belong to the dancing flame or the crackling logs. Outside, branches scraped against the cabin like fingernails, sending chills that no fire could chase away. The hermit's breath came in shallow clouds. He gripped his knife not from bravery, but from habit. The wind seemed to carry voices, soft, indistinct whispers just beyond hearing. Amos strained to listen, but the words slipped away like smoke. With each gust, the candle's flame shuddered, yet never died. Amos felt the weight of the night pressing closer, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Chapter 3. Shadows gather. Night deepened, thick and heavy, pressing in on Amos's cabin like a living thing. The candle's flame continued its stubborn dance, flickering but never succumbing to the wind's relentless assault. Outside, the forest seemed to shift. The trees whispered secrets in a language older than any man could understand. Shapes moved. Just beyond the firelight's reach, pale, elongated figures that vanished whenever Amos blinked. His eyes felt heavy, but he fought the urge to sleep. The stories from his youth echoed in his mind, the Wendigo, the spirit of hunger and cold, stalking the lost and the desperate. The candle was meant to keep it at bay. Yet Amos had begun to wonder if the flame was a summons instead. A sudden creak from the porch made him freeze. The wind howled, pushing against the cabin's thin walls, but the door remained shut. He reached for his knife again, hands trembling. Then, from the darkness outside, came a low, wet, scraping sound. Something was there, just beyond the window. Amos stared, heart pounding, as the candle's flame flickered violently once, twice, then steadied. The flame burned on. Chapter 4. The Unseen Presence. Amos barely dared to breathe. The scraping sound outside had stopped, but the forest held an unnatural stillness, as if waiting. The candle's flame cast long shadows across the cabin walls, shadows that seemed to twist and shift, as though alive. Hours passed in oppressive silence. Amos felt eyes watching him from the darkness beyond the glass. Though he saw nothing, he whispered old prayers, half remembered, words meant to ward off spirits, but they felt fragile against the overwhelming cold. His fingers grazed the candles, wax warm and oddly pulsating under his touch, as if the flame had a heartbeat. A sudden gust rattled the cabin, and the candle flickered wildly again. Amos's breath caught in his throat. Then, slowly, the flame began to grow taller, brighter not with warmth, but a cold, unnatural glow. The air thickened, the shadows deepened, and Amos understood the terrible truth. The candle was not his protector. It was a beacon. Chapter 5. The last flicker. The wind's howl turned into a roar, battering the cabin with icy fingers. Amos sat frozen, his eyes locked on the candle's unnatural flame, now towering and steady, casting a sickly glow. The warmth he once believed it gave was gone, replaced by a biting chill that seeped into his bones. Outside, the forest stirred. Twisted shapes emerged, drawn to the light like moths to a flame, their eyes glowing with hunger pressed against the windows. Amos tried to blow out the candle. He blew once, twice. The flame only flared brighter. His hands shook as he grasped the wick, but the flame burned on, unyielding. A final gust of wind swept through the cabin, cold and cruel. The candle sputtered once, then went dark. Silence swallowed. The forest. Morning found Amos's cabin empty. The candle was cold, the wick blackened but untouched, and the snow outside bore no footprints, only a faint trail of charred pine needles leading into the depths of the forest. And so the cold closes in once more. The candle has gone out. The laughter has faded into the trees. The chairs are still empty, and the forest remains hungry. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking these shadowed paths with me. But remember, the Wendigo is not just a tale of long ago. It is hunger that never ends, loneliness that whispers, and it waits for you in the dark before you go. Leave a light behind, like this video, so others may find their way. Share where you're watching from. And tell me, do you believe the Wendigo still walks? Sleep well if you can.